Hello, I'm Dr. Beverly Wright, and welcome to Analytics Out Loud. With us today, we have Dr. Mark Ferguson from University of South Carolina and Dr. Ron Menich from Catalina Marketing. Welcome, guys.
Welcome. Thank you, Beverly.
We're talking today about leveraging data science to optimize promotional display. So thank you for being here on Analytics Out Loud. So let's start off with a real basic question about your background. Tell us, we'll start with you, Mark. Why are you so cool, Mark? Tell us about your background.
Well, you may have some people debate the cool part, but I've always tried to incorporate, the use of data and decision-making my whole career. Started at IBM back in the early 1990s. As a supply chain manager there, moved into academics in the later 90s and focused mostly on supply chain management, inventory management, moved into revenue management and pricing, which really incorporates, a lot more, or had at least more data available for it. And more recently into the retail space, working with companies like Oracle, their retail division. I think you're muted, Beverly. Sorry.
Thank you, Mark, and we're so lucky to have you at University of South Carolina. And Dr. Bennett, tell us, why are you so cool? Tell us about your background.
Thanks, Beverly. Yeah, so much like Mark, I have a background in revenue management and price optimization. I spent 18 years doing that in various perishable asset industries like car rental and airlines and passenger rail and so forth. And then in 2013 or thereabouts, I moved into retail demand forecasting and did that for 4 years. And then I came to Catalina 3 years ago. And I now lead a team of 9 data scientists who are doing personalization, activation and measurement of ads and coupons for groceries and CPG companies.
Very nice. I feel like the whole world is focused on personalization right now, like making things down to a segment of one. And that's what Catalina seems like it's all about. So we're very fortunate to have you, Ron.
Thank you.
So the first question that I have for you guys is, I'm going to mostly ask Mark this question is, tell us about this research or this work that you're doing, this body of knowledge that you're building about optimizing promotional display. What does that even mean?
Well, thank you. I mean, it's a project that we started, I guess, about 5 or 6 years ago, honestly. We were working, as I mentioned, with Oracle Retail, and I had a new doctoral student that was looking at the promotion pricing models, which been fairly well studied, in our field, and how we could use kind of these nationwide data sets that companies, like Nielsen and IRI put out to gain insights, for grocery retailers in particular, on how they could maybe improve their profitability. And as we're going through it, we kind of came upon what was to us an interesting gap, if you will, in the literature and in the practice, of solution providers out there, is that no one seemed to be providing any guidance on what items to put on promotional display in a grocery store, for example. So think of end caps or islands or, by the counter aisles, dump bins. There's a lot of names for it. They had traditionally, just been based on whichever CPG company provided the biggest trade promotion and gave them the largest incentive to put their product on a display, or they might have some heuristic they would use, like what's the best seller in our soft drink division or beer division or soup division, and we'll just put that item on display for a couple of weeks and then we'll rotate it around. But nothing really focused on the data. Yeah.
So it's relatively subjective. When we say best seller, we mean like what seems to be selling well. We weren't evaluating the numbers.
Well, they would know which their top sellers were, but they would not necessarily know how much additional lift they would get if they put an item on a promotional display.
I see. Okay. Okay, gotcha. And what did your research find? Were there specific results that we should discuss?
Well, the promotional display is actually a really powerful driver of profitability for especially brick and mortar retailer. We found that we looked at the beer category in particular and found about a 27% lift on average for the SKU of beer that they put on promotional display versus the ones, that were not on promotional display. And that's not, that's taking out the effects of any other promotional efforts, like putting it in a flyer or having a sales promotion, a discount on that, or even seasonality effects. So just a flat off 27% lifts, which is a very, very, if you work in the grocery retail industry, that's a huge.
Huge, yeah. Okay. So Ron, would you tell us like about the importance of this kind of work? Like if you're trying to, it seems to me that promotional display is a big deal. How big of a deal is this?
Oh, promotional displays are an absolute huge deal. There's an entire trade promotion business process that goes on between retailers and the vendors many times during the year to decide what will be on those displays, what will be in the weekly circular, arranging deals, between the category managers at the retailer and the various vendor partners. It's a huge deal.
Okay. So this research seems like it would be incredibly valuable, but I would imagine that there are going to be some challenges in trying to implement it. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Sure. There's always going to be challenges, and Mark, congratulations to you and your team on this research. So, maybe I should call this considerations when implementing an algorithm like this. First thing to note is that I'm sure there were promotional displays in the markets of ancient Babylon. There's nothing new in retailing, and as a consequence, many people have been trained over decades in their careers to do things in a certain manner, and so any new decision process has to prove itself because it's not greenfield. It's coming in to replace an existing process to which many people have been accustomed. Whether that be good or bad, it's just that you have to be aware of the change management implications of putting in such an algorithm. And maybe go ahead. Did you have a question?
No, just that change is hard. I mean, and I see what you're saying. It's not like, oh, well, let's start promotions, and now let's come up with a way to figure out what goes on promotion. This has already been a thing since Babylonian, and so now we're trying to figure out what are we going to do instead of this comfortable thing that we've been doing over and over again. So that might be a barrier for sure.
Yep, and when you think about how are retailers structured, and then what are the implications about putting an algorithm like this into production at some retailers? So, retailers are often oriented around category managers who know all the products in their category, and they maintain relationships with the myriad vendors of those products, and they're constantly trying to arrange deals with those vendors through the trade promotion process. And there's kind of a natural competition that comes between these category managers as to what goes on display. And so as one deploys a method like this, I would think that some types of analytics that illustrate how fair the solution is and so forth would be useful to convince the category managers, particularly the ones whose products weren't chosen to be on the end cap display, that in fact this is a good thing for the company and will lead to a good bottom line results and better results for everyone.
So what I'm hearing so far, this is great, Ron. Thank you. This is wonderful. So even though we understand that optimizing promotional display is like really important, I mean, it's a big deal, especially for brick and mortar. And secondly, we also understand that a huge value could be gained from developing an algorithm to do so. And that it sounds like Mark's work with his colleagues has been, something that could be really, really useful. Even with all that, the challenges that, if I'm understanding you correctly, that I've summarized are, number one, change management. That's hard. Just getting people to re-evaluate the way they do things is hard. Secondly, is the way the retail is structured can have an impact and make it difficult. Third is there's a domino effect potentially with category managers, especially on the relationship side. And then fourth, you can't just sort of make it happen. You have to do some convincing and potentially some analytics and data science to prove out empirically how integration of this algorithm to help you optimize is going to improve your promotional efforts. Does that kind of summarize those four main points, or can we correct them at all?
Yeah, I think that's good. And there are, I think, further considerations that align with that as one thinks about implementing maybe a software package that would support this type of algorithm. One of the aspects, I've read a bit about Mark's algorithm, and it is a hierarchical one that first makes a decision at the category level, and then at the subcategory level, and then at the product level, if I'm quoting accurately. And so that kind of naturally leads to maybe some thinking about how those decisions are made and maybe when. Perhaps one makes a decision as to which category goes on display before one makes a decision as to what subcategories go on display. And if beer is chosen to be on the display for this particular week, then once that decision is made, what subcategories go on display is of no value or only tangential value to the paper goods category manager. And so, when you think about creating displays or reports, there, once you've gone past the category decision, then you're dealing with a different set of stakeholders, and maybe you have software that has login privileges that enable only, to look within a category or some such thing. So, nothing insurmountable here, but as I hear the algorithm, I think, well, how do I apply it? How do I create software? How do I fit it in over time to the decision processes that need to happen? All of that.
Yeah, no, those are good points. Thank you. And Mark, any thoughts on that before we move to the next question that has to do with the application? Because surely there are some areas that could absorb and take this in more easily than other areas. But any thoughts or commentary that you wanted to add about some of the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, what Ron mentioned are certainly challenges. They're not ones that, we academics, we kind of blithely kind of ignore a lot of times, right? You've got to convince someone to use this. But over the years, I found working with, kind of the in-betweens between the practitioners that are actually, doing this in their day-to-day jobs, and the academics that are working on these models are either the software providers or the solution providers that are coding, some of the analytics up into software. and then going out and doing the sales and the change management, and all with the organizations is a sweet spot, if you will, for getting more of our science actually, into practice. And, I'm very thankful that I'm on my end because I've been on the other end as well. and know how much
Yeah,
work.
I'm sure it is. And so what do you think about either of y'all, if you want to comment, but Mark, maybe what was intended, and Ron, what do you think would be best? But surely this doesn't fit easily with every type of retailer. So are there opportunities you see that are better for being able to take this sort of solution and integrate it, whereas other retailers, maybe there's a set or something of certain types or attributes about those retailers versus ones where they're higher hanging fruit? Thoughts?
Yep, and so this hopefully goes to your question, but there's, first off, the retailers who have end cap displays, or who are, shall I say, high-low retailers who have items that are constantly on promotion, and you can think about who those are, versus, shall we say, everyday low price retailers who are not as focused on that. And so that's a first division line. And then I think about who's implementing this software. In retail, there's been a lot of in-housing recently, and so perhaps the biggest retailers might want to build this themselves and have it be have some customizations that are very specific to their business processes. And then the other model is, an external, a third-party vendor who creates software, and maybe then that vendor goes after second-tier retailers who do not want to build it themselves, right? And
I see.
well, like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about trying to deploy this to many retailers or one particular retailer? Those are some things that come to mind.
No, I love it. So first, table stakes, you got to be a retailer that does promotion. You can't be some, everyday low price or everyday high prices. Not that anybody admits that, but there are some that they sort of live by that. Maybe they're higher end, but you have to be a retailer that believes in promotions and that actively does them. So that's kind of table stakes. And then the second piece being the consideration of, is this something that you want to take as it is kind of and use it, or do you want to use internal teams to kind of make it your own, or just take the idea of it and start from fresh, or even use an outside vendor to take a different perspective and create a solution in the form of an API or some sort of software tool. So it sounds like those are some really good options and thoughts about who might be able to apply this in a better way. Mark, do you have any follow-up thoughts to that?
Yeah, and one thing we tried to do when doing this research is typically when you talk about data analytics, the larger chains have an advantage over the smaller chains, right? There's just more data. They have more stores, they have more SKUs, they sell. So we designed our methodology around a data set that's really available to any grocery retailer, which is the IRI, data set, which is a sampling of stores all around the country that other retailers voluntarily, share their point of sales data into. And you really need, you need a large kind of representative data set like this for our methodology to work. So whether you're, a Kroger's or, a really large grocery retailer, Walmart, or just a small regional retailer, you can get access to this data set and apply the methodology.
Okay. But larger is usually better just because more SKUs, more data, more ability to analyze. Okay. I would also wonder too if I could add two attributes myself, which are, I would think you need to be fairly open-minded. And I know that sounds simple, and maybe it is, but it's also kind of rare. It's hard to find companies that are open-minded about the way they do things, especially if they've been implementing the golden gut and it's worked well. Sometimes success can be an inhibitor to trying out different types of data science solutions. And then the second thing is potentially to have multiple locations. So not only big, but also multiple locations, so that they could potentially develop a design of experiment. You know, Ron, you were talking about you should almost have to run analytics to prove that your analytics are good, or you may have to convince people to integrate and implement. So if you have multiple locations, a lot of times that gives you more freedom to develop a DOE sort of environment and really show empirically that the solution is beneficial. Would you guys agree with those, or do you have anything you'd modify?
Yeah, you know, to your last point, it's kind of a localization concept that you just talked about, and you know, retailers have a long history of doing things manually, or then, you know, translating that into 1,000 spreadsheets, and as one tries to do some of these decision processes, assortment planning, display, et cetera, at a more local level, you know, either you have to do that with lots of people and spreadsheets, or you have to have an automation mechanism surrounding that. And I think, you know, this piece of work is kind of oriented around the automation mechanism to help support localization of displays.
Yes. Okay. Cool. And I know we're crunching up on time. This has been really useful, very, very thankful, because the retail environment is such a big deal. And the use of data science to optimize within it is also a big deal, as you guys know. So thank you for this content. And my final question for you guys is for our listeners that maybe they are starting a new job, or maybe they already work in a job, or maybe they're a top leader and they're trying to figure this question out. What one piece of advice would you give someone who's trying to leverage data to optimize promotional display?
I can take the first crack at that. Is if you're trying to do this within like your own store, your single location, or even within your own chain, and just using your own data, you're probably just going to be frustrated, because what you're going to find is that only a very small subset of your SKUs in each category have ever been put on display. And that's the only SKUs you're going to have data on. So, you know, just to use an example from the beer category, right? A store will put, you know, Bud Light on promotional display multiple times a year. So there'll be plenty of data on how much lift you get when you put Bud Light on display. But there may be another brand, I'll just make up one, like Happy Hops, you know, it's a craft brew that you've never put on promotional display. So unless you have that in your data, you're not going to be able to estimate how much lift you would get by putting this maybe lower sales quantity brand, but that might actually be your more profitable choice. And this is where using the nationwide data set, you know, the much larger data set, because there's probably some store somewhere that's put Happy Hops on promotional display.
Right. Okay. So your number one piece of advice is think about additional data sets. Don't try to rely completely on yours, because you may feel a bit like you're using only anomalies. It's that scarce, or it could be. That's great advice. And normally something that someone would have to suffer many months to figure out. Yep. Ron, what final piece of advice would you give our listeners who are trying to leverage data for optimizing promotional display?
You know, if they're new entrants into the market, new data scientists, new analysts or whatnot, I would just counsel that if you have a chance to do anything with promotional data, take it, because this is just such an incredibly rich field. You know, I've spent the last 7 years of my career dealing with some aspect of this, either, you know, personalizing ads for it, or forecasting demand, and and Mark has this algorithm on what to put on display, and there's whole sets of separate supply chain issues on how to stock up those end cap displays. Like this is an incredibly wonderful area for practice and probably research as well.
Yep. So if you get an opportunity, take it. Do something. Try to do anything, even if it's something little. Very nice.
Thank you guys really
again.
quickly with that one, Beverly?
Yeah.
Someone who's moved
Yeah,
from
sure.
the supply chain side earlier in my career to more, I guess, the revenue pricing side later in my career. You make supply chain decisions, you may not see the results for months or years. If you make a pricing decision or a promotion decision, you often see the result immediately. So
Yep.
that is, I'll second Ron's, you know, if you get an opportunity, this is a very dynamic area where you can learn very quickly.
Yes. No, that's a great point. We oftentimes sit around and wait for results to come back, and we never know what happens. With this area, it's almost instantaneous. Very nice. Thank you again to Dr. Mark Ferguson from University of South Carolina and Dr. Ron Menich from Catalina Marketing for speaking to us today about leveraging data science to optimize promotional display.